Okay, so hello everyone and welcome to this knowledge pool session, which is our introduction to the Agile methodology. This is part of our project management training. So our housekeeping rules are the same as normal. I'll leave those there for you to read for a moment. The purpose of this session is to understand what Agile means in a project context and to understand the advantages and the disadvantages of using the Agile approach. So we're going to do a review of Agile in a project context. There was supposed to be an assignment on the success and failures of Agile, but for some reason that slide seems to have disappeared out of the slide deck. So what I'll try and do is I'll try and put that slide back in tomorrow and let you have a copy of that slide, which is the assignment on the success and failures of Agile. And really the purpose of this session isn't to turn you into an Agile expert, but it is to allow you to talk about Agile. It's to give you some of the language of Agile, to give you an idea as to how it works, why it's good, why it might be bad. And it's really so that you can talk at interview. If anybody were to ask you in an interview what you know about Agile, you'd be able to tell them a bit about what you understand the methodology works. And we'll talk a little bit about why it's important to projects at the moment. So we'll move on. So Agile is I want to start with these two definitions. So Agile is a method of project management that is characterized by the division of tasks into short phases of work and the frequent reassessment and adaptation of plans. Now, that comes from the Agile project management definition. So the first definition is project management and projects. The second definition we have on the screen is talking about Agile as a method for software development. So you can see that you can use Agile for at least two different things. You can use it for project management and you can use it for software development. Now, the definition we have for software development is that it's an approach to software development under which the requirements and solutions evolve through collaborative effort of a self-organizing and cross-functional team. And that collaborative effort involves the customers and the end users. It advocates adaptive planning, which is something that we saw in the first definition, evolutionary development, early delivery, and improvement, and it encourages rapid and flexible response to change. So these are two definitions of Agile. And what we need to understand is that Agile has come along as really a new methodology, initially for software development, as a replacement for the earlier waterfall model. And in the earlier waterfall model, what would happen was that requirements would be gathered, requirements would be reviewed and signed off, software development would commence in order to develop some software to meet those requirements. Testing would then take place to then prove that the software met the requirements, and ultimately this software would be given to the end users for them to use. Now, one of the problems with that method, that waterfall method, is it's quite inflexible because it follows a very strict path of requirements are gathered, software is developed, software is tested, and then handed over. It's quite a problem because if changes need to be made, if the requirements change, perhaps if the users who specified the requirements weren't that clear about what the requirements were, then that waterfall method is quite inflexible. And so you can see that what Agile is trying to do is it's trying to do work in short phases. So rather than taking all the requirements and trying to build something that meets all the requirements, it might take just a few most important requirements, maybe even just one important requirement, and tries to build something that can meet that requirement. And it then shares that with the users, so the users and customers for that requirement are involved in looking at what's been developed, testing it, and saying whether it meets their needs or not. Because if it doesn't, then you can repeat that exercise of trying to build something that does meet the user's needs, showing it and sharing it with the users, getting their feedback on it, and then repeating that exercise. And that is the essence of Agile, which is to break the work up into shorter phases and to more frequently reassess and to adapt the plans. And it's trying to involve the users of the software or the product or the deliverables of the project in specifying what's needed. And it's trying to be flexible. So Agile is trying to be this better methodology. And it really arose from small software developers based in the USA who started developing software for microprocessors in the 1980s. These small companies were able to use the portable computers that were starting to become available at the time to actually visit their customers, to see their problems firsthand, and to actually sit down with the customers and work through with the customers how to develop a software solution that met their needs. And breaking down those barriers between the software developers and the users of the software is a key element of Agile. And the concept can be extended to cover other situations in projects and in business. So anywhere where processes have to be changed, working with the end users who perform the current processes can avoid misunderstandings and can improve the speed of change. But for Agile to work, there has to be an ability to make a change and to see the results of the change quickly. For example, you might, if you were changing a process, change the process for just one or two operatives so that just one or two people are following the new process. You can see how they get on with the new process. If it works for them, you might roll that process out to other people. But if it doesn't work, you can work with those one or two users and you can make small improvements to the process in order to make it correct, so that when you start rolling it out to lots and lots of users, you can have a high degree of confidence that the process will work for all the different scenarios that come up in business. So in situations where you can only change a live system, you perhaps haven't got any sort of test system where you can make a change and see the effect of the change. If you've got just a live system and it takes a long time for the effect of a change to become apparent, then it's actually quite difficult to use Agile. You really need to find situations where you can make changes quickly and you can see those changes quickly. Anything where it takes a year or 2 years or 20 years or 50 years to see the effect of a change, like say with climate change, it's difficult to use Agile with it because you don't get the feedback that Agile needs quickly enough. But with software, it can be very easy to make changes quickly because you might have a test system, you can make a change in the system, and you can see immediately without affecting the live service whether that change has fixed a problem or met a requirement or whatever. So this is the essence of Agile, that we're breaking the work down into short phases. We're frequently assessing the impact of the work we've done, and we're adapting our plans so that we don't follow a plan for too long without being confident that the plan is working. So also in the 1980s, the concept of packaged solutions started to become a dominant theme within the software industry. So rather than software being developed for a single customer on a bespoke basis, packaged solutions were developed to meet a common set of needs that a number of users might have. Say, for example, requirements for a word processor, or requirements for an accounting package, or for project management software. And so as these packages started to become successful, the customers of them started to ask for new features. And suddenly the marketing department, which might have been focused on promoting the product, started to have to become involved in deciding what features would need to be included in the next version of the product. And so the concept of a product owner was born. And the product owner is somebody, usually in the marketing department, who decides what features are to be included in the next version of a software product and what bugs are going to be fixed in that next version. So you can see that the role of the product owner is very much aimed at the role of the product owner is very much aimed at directing the work of the development team or of the project team. The product owner decides what's going to be worked on, what's the highest priority, and what features are going to be fixed, what bugs are going to be fixed. Now, also in the 1980s, a new sort of software package started to be developed specifically to help with developing software. And these packages improved the speed at which software could be changed safely. And automated software testing solutions started to appear. And these developments started to allow software developers to work safely on very large projects as a collaborative team, and for changes to be made and tested quickly. So you can see how that facilitates Agile, because you can make a change, you can see it quickly. You can see the effect of the change quickly. Also means that you need to have version control. So you need to know what is in, what feature is in what version, what bugs are in what version. And these software tools that started to become available in the 1980s were helping all of that. And so they were facilitating Agile. And these collaborative teams were able to start working together on changing the software all at the same time. Now, the next concept we need to think about is this idea of a product backlog. And this is an important concept in Agile, because the product backlog is a list of all the features that have been requested to be added to the product. And that list, that product backlog, will normally be maintained in order of priority by the product owner. So the product owner will sort that list of features that have been asked for into the feature that is most valuable to the business, and it will put that feature to the top of the list, so that the moment that the software development team has capacity to start working on the next feature, the product knows exactly what they want the team to work on. So the product backlog is this list of all the features that have been requested. Some of those features may never be implemented. If the software development team just doesn't have enough time, if something more important always comes onto the list ahead of things that are less important, some of those features may never be implemented. So this is why it's called a backlog, because we are constantly adding to this list of things we want from the software, but there's a constraint on how quickly we can take things off that list, because the software development team isn't a resource. They can only work on so many things at once. But it's the product owner's job to maintain the product backlog in order of priority, so that they can always say what needs to be worked on next. Okay. We're going to move on and look at another important concept in Agile, and that's the concept of the minimum viable product. And to help you understand this concept, let's imagine some word processing software. And let's imagine that the software would allow you to compose a letter, but it wouldn't allow you to save it, and it wouldn't allow you to print it out. And so you have to think, well, what's the use of that software? I can write a letter, but I can't do anything with it. I can't email it to anybody. I can't save it. I can't print it out. What's the purpose of it? It would be a useless product. But imagine now that if that software allowed you to print the letter out, the product starts to become useful at that point. You might want to do other things with the letter. You might want to email it. You might want to save it. But if you can print it out, then perhaps that product starts to become useful. So for example, if you wanted to save a copy of a letter for reference, you could just print a second copy of it out and put that second copy into a filing cabinet. But these days, this would be regarded as undesirable, and any modern word processing software would be expected to be able to save letters electronically so that they could be referred to in future, and so that they could be used as a starting point for similar letters. So there is therefore a minimum level of functionality that a software product or any product must have if it's going to be viable, if it's going to be useful in its marketplace. So just see a reminder for Yetundi that might suggest she might have a meeting starting in 5 minutes. That's unfortunate because I'm using her login. If we do get disconnected for any reason, I'll put a new Zoom link on the Telegram group. So look there if we do get connected. So this idea of a minimum viable product is that for a product to be useful in a marketplace, it has to have a minimum level of functionality or a minimum level of features before users will agree to use the system. If it doesn't have that minimum level of functionality, it's just not useful enough for somebody to want to spend time learning how to use it and doing something with it if it doesn't do enough for them. So if it doesn't have those features, the effort of using the software will be too onerous compared with the benefits of using it. So because it's a product owner who's typically responsible for marketing the product, they become the decision maker as to what functionality must be present in a product if it is to be a viable product in its marketplace. Now, there will be pressure to get products released into market as quickly as possible. So there may be pressure on the product owner to agree to release the product with less than a minimum level of viable functionality. But this pressure must be resisted, because if you release a product that isn't useful enough, that can damage the product's reputation irreparably. So we would say that you need to define what is the minimum viable product in terms of the features it must have to be viable as a product. And you mustn't be swayed from that decision as to what is the minimum viable product. And these concepts of the product owner, the product backlog, and the minimum viable product, they can be applied to all kinds of products, not just software products. You could apply them to a car. So for example, you might have a marketing manager at Ford Motor Company. They would be the product owner for the new Ford Mondeo. They would decide what features that Ford Mondeo must have before it could be released to the market. So they may say, well, it must be electric. It must be an electric vehicle. It must be able to seat 5 people in comfort. It must be able to carry at least the luggage for 3 people. It must have some automated driving features, such as being able to maintain lanes on a motorway. They may have other automated driving features that may be candidates to be in the minimum viable product, but the product owner may decide that actually they could release their new Ford Mondeo with just that one automation feature of being able to maintain a driving position on the road between 2 white lines on a motorway. So these are the important concepts of Agile, and we're going to go on to look at some more, but perhaps I'll just stop and ask, are there any questions on what we mean by the product owner, the product backlog, and the minimum viable product?
No.
Hi.
Hi. No.
Okay.
So, Tony, I just want one question about the product owner, right? So the product owner, if I got you right, are they the clients, or do they work for the organization?
Sure. Yeah.
Or the end user.
That's a good question. Is sort of, do they work for the end user? Do they work for the supplier? Who do they typically work for? And it is different in somewhere like a software company or the Ford Motor Company or any motor manufacturer. The product owner will typically be in the marketing department, because they're responsible for selling that car or that software product into a market. But if we think about a software product that is maybe a CRM system or a learning management system that's used within a company, there will usually be some manager within the company that is responsible for providing that system or the services that that system provides. So let's take a different example. Let's think about a HR system. So normally within an organization, there'll be a HR system that has records of all the employees, all the hours they've worked, and all the pay that they've been paid in the past. And it's via that HR system that the organization also produces its payroll, so it can pay people. So within that organization, there will be somebody who is responsible for what the HR system does. And that will normally be a senior manager in the HR function. It might even be the HR director. So I was saying that in the example of a HR system, there'll be somebody, a senior manager in the HR function, who will be responsible for what that system does and also what it needs to do. So say, for example, the regulations change on working hours, and say there's a new rule that says people can't work more than 40 hours a week. We wouldn't like to have such a rule. The HR manager that's responsible for the HR system, they would be the product owner, and they would be responsible for arranging for the system to be changed so that it implemented that new rule that people couldn't work more than 40 hours a week. Now, the way that they might do that is they might engage their in-house developers if the HR system had been developed in-house, Or they might go to a software vendor. And that software vendor might have their own product manager. So you might have two product managers involved in considering what is required within a single system. But it's important to understand that the product owner who sits within the customer organization, the organization that uses the software, they can only ask for features. They can't tell their supplier to implement those features. It's the product owner within the supplier who actually owns the product. They're the real product owner. They get to decide what goes into the product or what doesn't go in. The product owner who sits in the client organization, they might have a product backlog. They might have features that they want. They can ask the real product owner for those features, but they can't make the real product owner deliver those features, because ultimately it's the real product owner who owns the product and who gets to decide what is going to be put into it. So another example, because this is a great question, this will really help you understand. Another example might be where a new business process is needed. Say your business is a bank and you offer mortgages, where you lend people money in exchange for security on their house. A new rule might come in where you need a new process, or you need to change an existing process. There will be a senior manager in the business who owns the business processes for mortgages. They might be called a mortgage manager. They might be called a secure lending director. But there will be a senior manager in the business. They will be responsible for the systems and processes that are used for issuing mortgages. And if something needs to change, they will be the product owner of the process and of the systems used for mortgages. And so they will have something, if a process change is needed, that will need to be put onto their product backlog. And they will need to find somebody that can make that change. And if the change is big enough, they might actually set up a project to make the change. And so the project might have a project manager, and that project manager might be directed as to what needs to be done by the product owner. The product owner is somebody that works within that organization, possibly as a peer of the project manager. But it's that product owner who owns the system and owns the processes and who has the business requirement. They're the product owner. They get to say what is needed. So that's quite a complicated answer to an important question. Has that left you with more questions? Or has that, yeah, no? Has that explained it adequately?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, but yes, it's a very good question as to who might the product owner be, because it can.
Okay, so
Can
we now say, sorry, can we not say that the product owner is like a manager that would receive the product and probably test it and all those stuff? Because in the case of the HR and the software company, it sounds like the product owner will be the manager, the HR manager.
Yes, so I think you're right that it would be the person that is going to have to use that system within the business to do something useful. It's the manager that's in charge, and when we say they would have to use it, we don't mean that they're going to sit down and they're going to pay everybody. We mean that they run the department that uses the system.
Yes, I understand now.
Yeah. So they own the system effectively, and if they need it to do something different, then they are the product owner for that system. So they have a requirement that is on their product backlog, something that they need the system to do that it doesn't currently do, and they have to find a way to get the system changed in order to do that. And that might be via a project, it might be via a request to the vendor of the software. There are different ways that the product owner can get the changes made, depending on what the system is, what the process is, what the product is that they're the owner of. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you, Tony.
Okay. So the next thing we need to talk about in terms of concepts as part of Agile is the idea of a sprint. And we saw when we looked at the definitions of Agile that Agile aims to break things up into short packets of work. And the name that Agile gives to those short chunks of work, those short packets of work, is they're called sprints. And the analogy is exactly from the world of athletics, where somebody makes a short dash towards a finishing line, they cross the finishing line, and then they get their breath back. And then if they're a trained athlete, they might do another sprint. And this is exactly what Agile suggests we should do with software development and with other sorts of development, is we should have short periods of intense development activity whose aim is to deliver a working product that can be shown to the users for them to see whether that product meets their requirements or not. Now, the reason that you do these short periods is that it stops you going off track for too long. If you spend a long time developing something and it's a wrong thing, you've misunderstood the user's requirement, you can really go a long way off track and you can waste a lot of money by not reviewing the output of your work quickly. So Agile recommends these short periods of work to stop us going wrong for too long. It also means as well that we don't need to do as much planning. It means that we start development more quickly because we don't do as much planning with Agile as we might do with the waterfall model. We start developing more quickly, and what we've found with Agile is that means you start to learn about the problem more. You remember when we studied the project initiation stage, and we talked about how one of the key deliverables really of the initiation stage is an understanding of what the problem is that the project has been set up to fix. Well, the sooner you start trying to fix that problem, the sooner you learn how difficult it is. What are the sticking points? So Agile recommends that you try to start developing as quickly as possible. Don't do too much planning. Do the planning that's necessary, but don't start doing too much. And so this idea of learning by doing the work is another fundamental part of Agile. It's one of the reasons that Agile works well, is because you learn about things as you go along and you get the opportunity to change what you're doing based on what you've learned. By doing the work in short periods of activity, it does create this situation where you've crossed over the finish line and you can then take a breath, you can look back at the work, you can reflect on it, and you can decide then what's the next thing that needs doing? What's the next most important requirement that's on the product backlog? And what's involved in building something that meets that requirement? And as well as learning about the problem that the team is trying to solve, the team also learns about how it can work better as a team. This is another reason why Agile recommends starting development quickly, because it's really when the team gets into the job of solving the problems that the business has that the team starts to come together as a team. So the sooner you start development, the sooner the team starts to work together. And if you do these short sprints where, having crossed the finish line, you can look back and check to see that what you've achieved is useful to the business, it meets the user's needs. You can also take that opportunity to look back at how you might work better as a team. And studies of Agile have shown that the teams that look back at how they're working and try to improve their ways of working deliver much better and faster and quicker, and they have a better output than the teams that don't reflect on how they're working together. So Agile encourages you to do these short periods of intense activity where you're really focused on doing something. And what it recommends is that you always try to deliver something that's working. So you can actually show it to the user, they can feel it, they can touch it, they can try it out, they can say, yep, that meets my requirements, or that's sort of what I meant, but actually it would be better if it did this. And so you gather that feedback as to what the users need, and it keeps you on track. So the next sprint you undertake can improve the product further and get closer to what the user actually needs. So an Agile development cycle, so the delivery phase of a project that's being run using Agile, will actually look like a series of these sprints. So you'll do a sprint, you'll reflect on the output, you'll do a sprint, you'll reflect on the output, you'll do another sprint. And it's a sort of circular motion rather than the waterfall approach, which is you do A, you do B, you do C, and when you've done C, you finish the project. With Agile, you loop back and keep reflecting on whether you're finished or not. There is another concept, which is that in Agile, they sometimes talk about the concept of a sprint zero. So sprint 1 is the first sprint where you try to produce a working product. Sprint 2 is where you try to improve that working product. But there's also the concept of a sprint 0, which is a sprint, so it's a short period of intense activity. But the purpose of the activity isn't to deliver a working product, but it's actually to prove that the team is ready to commence that intensive development activity that's going to occur within sprint 1 and within the subsequent sprints. So sprint 0 isn't where you put the team together. The team has to come together before a sprint 0 can be run. But it's in this sprint 0 when you're basically giving the team something to do as a team, using the tools that they're going to need to use to build the product, just to prove that everything works. So you're proving that the team works, the environments are ready, everything is ready for this short, sharp, intense period of activity that's going to occur in sprint 1. I was saying that it's a new method, and sometimes that leads to it being treated unfairly. And actually it isn't that new. As I mentioned, really Agile started to become a thing in the 1980s. The issue was that it wasn't called Agile then. It wasn't really given any name. It took until sort of the early 2000s before people started to talk about Agile ways of working and Agile as a methodology. So it's not really a new method, but it's often perceived as new. And so people may criticize it for being new and untested, when actually it is a proven technique, but it's new. Another disadvantage potentially of Agile is that it does require a greater involvement of stakeholders. So the stakeholders have to be available at the end of every sprint to comment on what's been produced. And many stakeholders who are used to the waterfall method of working, they sort of expect that they're going to do a slug of work to define their requirements. They're going to give those requirements to the projects, and the project may ask 1 or 2 questions about them, but basically the project's going to go away for a year and develop those requirements, and then it's going to come back with a finished product, and the stakeholders will need to spend a month or two testing that product. And for some stakeholders, that's an okay way of working. If they've had success with other projects and been pleased with that way of working, stakeholders can be resistant to the idea that every few weeks they have to look at the next thing that the project has developed, sign it off, say, yes, that meets our requirements, or no, it doesn't. And these are the ways in which you need to improve it. So on the face of it, it can seem to need more involvement from stakeholders. But this is just a perception. In reality, because that stakeholder involvement stops the project going wrong and stops the project delivering the wrong thing, it ultimately does save the stakeholders time, because the stakeholders have to spend less time overall if they work in this agile way. Okay. So there was just one point I should have mentioned where we said it was a new method. Because it is, in some respects, new, not everybody has used it before. A team that is starting to use Agile for the first time will need support with it. So they will need a Scrum Master to coach them on how to use Agile. But it's also the case that the management of the organization may be unfamiliar with Agile, and the senior management may need some coaching to help them understand how Agile is different from their previous ways of working. And that's one of the problems of Agile being a new method, is it may need a bit of explanation to people as to how it works and why it's good. Now, another issue is with scalability. And what we mean by scalability is the ability of Agile to deal with big problems. Once you start getting to problems of a certain large size, because Agile doesn't rely on a lot of planning and a lot of design work, you can find that for large problems, Agile doesn't work very well. And one way to work around that is to use product-based planning, as we saw last week. Using product-based planning, we can divide the project up into a number of deliverables, and then we can use Agile to deliver each of those deliverables. So you could, for example, have a number of different Agile teams, each of which were working on one product. So Team A works on product A, Team B works on product B, Team C works on product C. So you can combine product-based planning and Agile to help solve bigger problems. What you may need to do is you may need to change how you run your sprints. So for example, in that situation where you have products A, B, and C, and teams A, B, and C working on those products, what you may need to do is to let teams A, B, and C do their first few sprints on their own. But then you may need to have a sprint where you bring all three teams together into a larger team and run a sprint where you're perhaps focusing on the interface between products A, B, and C. And you may need to do another sprint with all the teams together where you focus on the interface. And then at the end of that sprint, once the interface is working, you can perhaps allow the teams to split up again and go back to doing their own sprints just on their product. So Team A can do a sprint on their product A, Team B can do a sprint on product B, and so on. So there are ways that you can use Agile even to solve very big problems. But Agile, you need to be thoughtful about how you're using Agile if you're trying to solve a very big problem. Say, for example, trying to send a man to the moon. You'd have to be quite thoughtful about how you did that, because otherwise you would have one enormous team all trying to build a rocket and nobody actually thinking about how to allow the astronauts to move around on the moon. So we need to think about scalability with Agile. and I've mentioned this point 3 times now, but in systems where it takes a long time to respond to a change, or in systems that are unstable, so where you make a change and it essentially breaks the system, so the system grinds to a halt, in those sorts of systems, you can't use Agile. Agile doesn't work in those sorts of systems, so you have to use a waterfall approach where you do more planning and you take longer to do things if you have those situations. Okay, so that's the disadvantages of Agile. It's not a perfect methodology, but it is the best thing that we have for project management, and for most projects, it will be the best way of working. So at Knowledge Pool, we would say you should use Agile as your default methodology, but you should combine it with product-based planning. You should combine it with product-based planning if you're trying to solve a large problem. And you can combine it with other aspects of the project management methodologies we teach, like the initiation stage and the planning stage. All of these work with Agile. Ah, right, okay. So, shows how well I wrote this. Right. Okay, so we do have the slide in for the assignment, but I haven't really reviewed this slide and corrected it. So what I'm going to do is I'll move on. I'll provide this slide to you tomorrow separately on the Telegram group, and then you'll have that assignment to follow on Agile. This is basically looking at examples from the internet where Agile has been successful, or where Agile didn't work well, or where it created a particular problem. So the assignment is to search the internet for an example of where Agile has worked very well, and also to search the internet for an example of where Agile didn't work well, or where it produced a particular problem. And I guess what I'd like to know in the first example is the name of the project. So find me the name of a real project where Agile was very successful. And then I'd also like you to find the name of a project where Agile didn't work well, or where it produced a particular problem. And for that, I'd like to know what that problem was. What was the problem that Agile caused? And you'll need to do a bit of research, but if you provide that those 2 answers to me in a Word document or a text document on the G Drive, I will look at that and mark it as an assignment, and I'll send you the full assignment details tomorrow via Telegram, and you can ask me any questions you need to on Telegram. Is that okay? Okay for the assignment?
Yes, Tony.
Yeah. And I've mentioned here is if you can provide a link to the web page where you found the project and its success or failure, that would be interesting to me as well. I'd like to see those links to that, but I'll send you the details. So in summary, Agile is saying that you should start developing as soon as possible, because the sooner you start to develop solutions to the problem, the sooner you start to learn about how difficult it is to solve that problem, what you need to do to solve the problem, and also to learn how the team works as a team. So Agile recommends starting work on developing a solution as quickly as you can. And it recommends these short, rapid cycles of work, sprints, followed by review and learning and adaptation, and then more cycles of work. It also recommends that teams organize themselves. And I guess this is something we haven't talked much about in the course in this session, but it is a fundamental part of Agile that the teams are self-organizing. The role of the project manager in an Agile team is slightly different. The project manager is there to provide some direction, but the team is also supposed to organize themselves. One of the most important things that you need to do in Agile is to identify the minimum viable product. That is, the minimum viable product is the thing that is going to be useful to the business. And if you have less features in that thing, then it starts to be not a viable product. It starts to become useless because it can't save the word processing document you've created, or it won't, if it's you've got a car and it won't go around corners, if you've got a car and it won't go around corners, that's not the minimum viable product. That's a useless car. So the minimum viable product is a product that is useful in some way to somebody in a business or a customer. And very often the first view you have of what the minimum viable product is going to be is when you define your requirements for the minimum viable product in your product backlog. So you see them in your product backlog, and you can mark them. The product owner can mark them to say, this is my MVP. And they will often use that abbreviation. This is my MVP. This is my minimum viable product. I need to have these 8 features. If I don't have these 8 features, the product just doesn't do enough for it to be useful to me. I won't use it. So I need these 8 features. So that's what the minimum viable product is. And it's really important that you identify what requirements are and the quality criteria for that minimum viable product, so that the sprints can happen. And once you've actually built your minimum viable product and the product owner said, yep, that's my minimum viable product, you could actually consider going live with that product. You could go live with it so that the business can start to get some value out of it. And while the business is starting to use that minimum viable product, the sprints can continue, the development work can continue to develop additional features. But what you then have to think about is, when do you make those additional features live? Because if the system's already being used to do useful work in the business, you have to think about, if I release this new feature, is that going to confuse people? Is it going to break something? So you have to be a bit careful about, if you carry on developing after you've gone live with your minimum viable product, you have to be a bit careful about how you release your changes, your subsequent developments. There are these 2 key roles in Agile: the role of the product owner, the person who gets to decide what's going to be in the product, what requirements will be met by the product and which requirements won't be, which requirements are going to be the minimum viable product requirements, and which requirements are going to be more than that. And then there's this role of the Scrum Master, who is a coach. They are the experts on Agile. So if the organization or the team is new to using Agile, it's the Scrum Master that will help them get the most out of the technique. And the final point to sum up on is really, it's at that initiation stage of the project that you really need to decide whether you're going to use Agile or Waterfall, because that decision is going to change the shape of the planning stage. The planning stage is going to be shorter when you're using Agile, and the list of requirements you gather is going to be shorter when using Agile during the planning stage. So you really need to decide whether you're using Agile or Waterfall during the initiation stage. And of course, once you've chosen that, you can't change easily. You might have to if you find that Agile or Waterfall really isn't working for you, but it would be unfortunate if you have to make that decision to change, because you're effectively saying that you got that decision wrong at the waterfall stage, at the initiation stage. So that's our module on Agile. So I'd like to just open up the floor to any questions that anybody has about Agile and how the methodology works. Is there anything you need to know?
Anthony, I will, about this Scrum Master, do we say the Scrum Master is a you said you used the word expert, like a professional or a senior manager, project manager.
Yeah.
Can we say that the Scrum Master is a senior project manager? Do they look alike? Or?
They don't necessarily look alike.
Okay.
No, the role of the Scrum Master is as a coach, and effectively a teacher. So the Scrum Master is really a teacher. The project manager isn't a teacher as such. Project managers have always tried to coach their teams and tried to help their teams improve, but really the project manager's job is to make sure that the project delivers. Sorry, excuse me. Excuse me. So the project manager's role has traditionally been a very directing role. It's been very authoritative. You know, you must do this, you must have it finished by this date.
Yeah.
In an agile context, the project manager's role changes because the project manager is supposed to be part of the team, and the team is supposed to be self-organizing. So the team shouldn't really need a project manager to organize them. But because project managers do organize teams, project managers have a lot of expertise in organization. So project managers can be quite good at helping the team to organize itself and, you know, sort of allocating roles to people to helping people make decisions. Project managers can be quite good at that. So the project manager and the Scrum Master are different roles. But that's not to say that one person can't do both roles, but they have to be good at both roles to do them.
Now I understand.
So they have to be a good project manager and a good Scrum Master before they can do both.
Okay.
Yeah. Lots of project managers that haven't used Agile before, they're very keen to learn Agile. They're very keen to become Scrum Masters, but unless you are a good Scrum Master and you're also a good project manager, it's actually very difficult to do both jobs well, because you need a lot of expertise to realize when you need to be a project manager and when you need to be a Scrum Master. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good question. Thank you. Any other questions?
No, not from me.
No. Okay. Right. So as I say, the recording should be available on YouTube tomorrow, because we've now got 3 recordings.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure, yeah, go ahead.
Wednesday I was okay. Now this Agile method, is it you were talking about software and other stuff. Is it that it is not product based? It has to be more of like a software. It has to be more in the software in the industry, not like, okay, if we want to build like a community hall now, and we can't use Agile in that form, in that kind of project.
Yes. You can use Agile in many different sorts of projects.
Okay.
So if your project is to build a community hall, you can use Agile to do that. You would go through the same project life cycles that we said. You'd have an initiation stage where you make sure you understand the problem that you're trying to solve. You make sure you understand the approach. You make sure you say that you're going to use Agile as your delivery mechanism. You have your planning stage where you design your hall and you gather the requirements for the hall and you design the hall so it can meet those requirements. But then when you come to build the hall, you can start to work in an Agile way. So you can start to have a morning meeting where you say, right, today we're going to lay the foundations for the hall. And the first step, what we're going to do today is we're going to dig the holes for the foundations. And then tomorrow we'll do another daily Scrum meeting. And if we haven't managed to dig all the holes that we need for the foundations, we'll work out why. and whatever the blocker is, we'll clear that blocker, and then we'll decide, right, okay, so we think we can clear that blocker, so we'll finish digging the holes and we'll pour the concrete tomorrow because we've not ordered the concrete for today. So you can use this agile way of working. You can use the daily sprints. You can have a 2-week sprint where you put a lot of effort into your construction of your hall. And you can then say, right, let's take a break. Let's have 2 days off from the construction. Let's look at, are the foundations good enough? Is everything in the right place? How are we working as a team? You know, have we got the right people doing the right jobs? And once you're happy, you can say, right, well, we can move into our sprint planning then for the next sprint. And then in the sprint planning, you would say, right, well, what's on the product backlog? Well, we need walls, we need windows, we need doors, we need a roof. What can we do in the next 2 weeks? We can do the walls. So we'll put the walls onto the sprint backlog. And then you'll have daily sprints and a daily Scrum meeting where you look at how well you're getting on building the walls. And after 2 weeks, you'll see if you can improve how you work as a team and whether you've built the walls in the way that they needed to be built. And if they have been built and everybody's happy with the walls, the product owner will say, right, we can move on to our next sprint. Let's put the roof on. And so you'll get the requirement for the roof. You'll put that on your sprint backlog, and then you'll do 2 weeks of putting the roof on. So you can use Agile and these ideas, these core ideas of Agile, say around a self-organizing team where there's nobody really directing the work. The team itself is taking responsibility for managing itself and for spotting if somebody is having trouble with a task and helping them out with that task. You can do all of those things with many different sorts of projects. So the product that you're trying to build doesn't have to be a software product. It can be a product that might be sold in a shop or a motor dealer's like a car. It can be a product that might be a new business process. It can be a product that might be a new community hall. You can use Agile for doing all of these sorts of things. And you may, if you look on the internet, find some examples of where the military have used Agile to run relief operations in disaster hit countries. And they use the ideas of the sprints where they sort of land and they try to get something working. They try to get a pump working, so there's fresh water. And then they'll try to get a hospital erected. And then they'll try to get a this and a that. So they're working in these short sprints. So the military have used Agile for disaster relief operations. So it's a very widely applicable technique.
Okay, so
Yeah.
it can be applicable both in physical products and non-physical products.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm sorry, I think I'm asking too much questions.
No, you're not. No, absolutely. I'd much rather you ask these questions because they're interesting questions.
The last one I will ask now is that, okay, if you're working as a project management and you are using the Agile method and you need a Scrum Master and you think you are not good in the Scrum Master, do you request or do you employ a Scrum Master that is good?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You sort of do, but generally project managers don't always have the authority to hire people.
Okay.
And this is why we say that it's really during the initiation stage that you need to decide whether you're going to use Agile or not, because it's during the initiation stage that you're looking at what you need, what resources do you need to deliver the project. So it's during the initiation stage that you should be thinking, I'm the project manager. Have I got enough skills to also be the Scrum Master? Or do I need to put into my project budget the money to hire a Scrum Master? And then I need to get my budget approved. And if I get my budget approved, that's great, because that means I know I can hire a Scrum Master and I can have that expert to help the team work more effectively and to help me use Agile to deliver the project more quickly and more safely. Generally, it will be the case that if you use Agile on any sizable project, you can pretty much guarantee to save the cost of the Scrum Master. Just by using Agile, you will avoid so many problems and so many hiccups by using Agile that you can guarantee you'll save the cost of the Scrum Master. So the Scrum Master will usually always pay for themselves just in the problems that they help you avoid.
Okay, now I understand. Yeah. Okay.
Tony, just one more question from me, please.
Sure.
So as the product manager, you can determine whether to use Agile or any other method.
So in theory, yes. In practice, some organizations are quite prescriptive, and they will say you must use Agile or you must use Waterfall, or if the project meets these criteria, you must use Agile. So some organizations can be quite prescriptive, but I think as a project manager, you should have a lot of input to the decision as to how the project is going to be delivered, because you're going to have to work with that methodology. You're going to have to agree with that methodology and use it and be an expert in it. So if somebody says you must use Agile and you're not an expert in it, and they won't let you hire a Scrum Master because perhaps they see the cost as too expensive, then I would say as a project manager, you have a duty to pull back and say, I don't think I can manage this project because I don't have enough expertise with Agile, and yet you're forcing me to use Agile. It's not a method I know. It's not a method I understand well enough to be able to support the team. So I don't think we should be using it. And if you force me to use it, then I'm not going to be the project manager. And I do know project managers that have said that and have walked off a project because they've disagreed fundamentally with the decision that's being forced on them by somebody else.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's not a good situation to be in, but sometimes for reasons of professional integrity, you have to walk off a project if the situation is untenable. But that situation is usually very rare. The best project managers can usually argue the case that either they use Waterfall because it's what they know and they think that they can guarantee the project can be delivered with Waterfall, or they can argue that a Scrum Master should be hired so that they can use Agile, but so that they don't have to be the expert in Agile. Yeah. So the good project managers are the ones that tend to influence the decision makers so that the decision makers make the right decision.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
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 All right. Thank you.
No
Thank you so much, Con.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
And you have a good evening. Cheers. Bye for now.
You too. Bye. Bye.